Wagner. I'm one of the co-chairs of United Methodists for a Kairos Response, along with Lisa Bender. It's my pleasure to welcome you here today. It might be this morning, for some of you this afternoon. UMKR is United Methodists for Kairos Response. We've been around about 10 years. We're not an official agency of the United Methodist Church, but rather an activist group within the church. Promoting Palestinian concerns. We have been involved in divesting from the occupation and encourage the United Methodist Church to do that. We're also active in a number of annual conferences, and I would encourage you, if you're a leader in an annual conference, to contact myself or Lisa. Just find a way to get a hold of us. We're pretty available through our website, which is ubiquitous. You can find it just by typing in our name. But please let us know you're there, and if you'd like to participate in any annual conference organizing. I'm going to start now introducing, just very briefly, our speakers, since they're both of their bios are already in the registration form. JONATHAN KUTTAB is an international attorney. He has license to practice law in New York State, Palestine, and Israel. He is quite well known and just a strong ally, particularly of those of us who are call ourselves evangelicals, who are interested in pursuing peace in the Holy Land. Just a powerful, powerful voice. The other is also a longtime friend, DALIT BAUM. She is currently working with American Friends Service Committee. She's an Israeli citizen, has been a longtime activist and a researcher par excellence of companies that are involved in sustaining the occupation. And we're honored to have them both. I'm going to ask JONATHAN to start and to share a little bit about what is happening with this annexation and begin our conversation. So off to you, JONATHAN.
Thank you. It's good to see a number of faces and names that are familiar to me. And we are dealing with something that is very, very current. Since my time is limited, I'll try to focus specifically on 3 objections to the annexation and why it's very problematic and why I think there is very broad opposition to it throughout the world, but even in this country and even among friends of Israel. The first objection, which maybe is not given as much weight, is that annexation, any annexation, really shakes the foundations of international law. Since after the Second World War, it's been a bedrock of international law that you just don't annex. You know, you fight, you dispute, you temporarily occupy, but you don't take over anybody's, any other territory under any circumstances. Whatever your historic, tribal, security, religious, demographic needs are. There's 195 countries in the world. We can't afford to have people annex somebody else's territory. There's only been 3 cases of people who tried to annex since the end of World War II, and they have been roundly rejected by the international community. When Iraq tried to annex Kuwait as part of its 19th governorate, the whole world said, you cannot do that. You simply cannot. When Russia tried to annex in the Crimea, even though they tried to pretend that it was done through a plebiscite and it was locally called for, the entire world says, no, you cannot do that. And then Israel, which first tried to annex East Jerusalem, roundly condemned, later annexed the Golan Heights, nobody accepted it, and now is trying to annex parts of the West Bank. However, under this administration, which doesn't really care that much about international law, it seems that there is hesitation, there is a willingness to allow Israel to get away with it. But anybody who knows how the international law system works knows that this is really very problematic. Objection number 2. For those who believe in a two-state solution, for all its problems, for all its perhaps injustice, most people thought that this problem can be solved through a two-state solution. That while Israel itself must be recognized as a state within the 1967 borders, the areas that they controlled or that they occupied in 1967 really shouldn't be theirs. They should form the basis for a Palestinian state. So every settlement that gets set up, every adjustment to the borders, every annexation is a problem because it undermines the possibility of a two-state solution. Now comes this annexation, which really openly and formally basically puts the last nail in the coffin of the two-state solution. Really makes it clear that you cannot have a two-state solution. There will never be a Palestinian state. Now, many activists say, of course, that's always been the case. There really never was an intention to allow a Palestinian state. Much of the behavior, the unilateral action of the Israeli government has been aimed at undermining or preventing the possibility of such a state. Never, though, has it ever been so clear and open and formal that we really want to eliminate the possibility of a Palestinian state. So many people are opposed to annexation precisely from that political background. If you annex land, you're really basically saying there's not going to be a Palestinian state, and you're basically saying forget about peace in the Middle East. It is what it is. This is the reality. But there's also been a third objection to the annexation, and this comes from many who are very Zionist, very even right-wing, and they're saying, what do we need this headache for? For all intents and purposes, we have annexed the occupied territories. We act as total and complete and full sovereign. We ignore Geneva Conventions. We ignore any restrictions on us. We act
Jonathan,
we control, sir.
Jonathan, you're breaking up just a little bit.
Okay.
I don't know what to do to fix it, but I'm concerned that people are not hearing. Can you wave your hand if you have trouble hearing him? Okay, thank you. Maybe you just need to be closer somehow. I don't know. This is happening. Thank you.
Is this better? Is this
yes.
better? Okay. So those people say Israel has been acting as real sovereign. They've been taking whatever bits of land here and there. They've been putting up settlements. They control who enters, who leaves. They control the water. They control the airspace. They control the ether space. They change the laws whenever it's in their interest. Annexation makes it difficult. It creates a problem. Our friends outside do not understand it. It makes it obvious that we have an apartheid system, because obviously Palestinians are living under one set of rules and the settlers and the other Israelis are living under another. So if you annex it formally, you are actually calling on the rest of the world to oppose you. You are bringing attention to the reality on the ground, which is an apartheid reality. And I'm not using this term as a pejorative term. I'm not accusing Israel. I'm just describing a system where two sets of laws exist for two different populations. But the relevant thing is, are you Jewish or not? And that is the definition of apartheid. And so these people say, we don't want annexation because it brings up this problem in a way that the world can no longer ignore it. They've been ignoring it. They've been quiescent. The European Union isn't doing anything about it. Surely the United States isn't doing anything about it. The international community. But when you annex, you're almost demanding that the international community do something about it. So there's been this third objection to annexation from people who are friends of Israel, who are very Zionists, and who are saying, look, we can continue to pretend that we're working for peace, that we're working for a two-state. Yes.
Jonathan, sorry, you're breaking up enough that I think you better call back in, and maybe you'll get a better line. And it's difficult to hear you. Perhaps
I think
go ahead.
We can move ahead. I'm turning off the videos from folks. If you're not presenting, if you turn off your video, that will help with the internet connection. So let's try that.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you, Bridget. That's much better.
Thank you. There's one last comment that I want to make before my time is up, and that is this. What Netanyahu is proposing to do is not annex the entire West Bank or even the entire Area C, if you're familiar with the designation of Area A, B, and C. He wants to take the maximum territory with the minimum number of non-Jews in it. He wants to annex the settlement blocks. He wants to annex the areas which have a lot of Jewish settlers and very, very few Palestinians. This has been the policy all along, which is why many people call it apartheid. You're trying to get the territory, but you're trying not to get the population. And there are all sorts of legal mechanisms that Israel has been using to gradually annex more and more of the West Bank without giving citizenship or equal rights to the population. And the Trump plan basically fits right into this mental orientation. That if you want Israel to be a Jewish state, you want to have a lot of Jews there, you want to have Jews control the land, and you want to de-emphasize, delegitimize, de-enfranchise, and then put in an inferior position all non-Jews in what is to be a Jewish state. So the system is at its very roots an apartheid system, a racist system, a system that discriminates against the population who are not Jews in favor of those who are Jews. And to do that, while saying we don't want anti-Semitism, we don't want to label things, is problematic because the reality on the ground labels everyone there either as Jewish or non-Jewish. We outside, try to be very careful on using the words Israeli or the Zionist versus Jewish, because some of the best friends and allies who are really committed to peace are Jewish people. So we have to be careful what language we use, but the reality on the ground is that the criteria for rights and privileges, for political power and for access, for visas, for visiting, for going, for where you live is whether you are Jewish or not Jewish. And this is the problem that we have to do as we use our language carefully, because we certainly oppose anti-Semitism. That's very clear. We're not saying Jews should be discriminated against or singled out for anything. But here's a system that does single out Jews and gives them privileges that it denies the indigenous population who are not Jewish. And with that, I think I will end my comment because there's a lot more to say and a lot of very interesting questions to address later on. But I want to end here.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm going to allow DALIT here some time and to respond to some of the issues you brought up and also present some of her own. DALIT?
Thank you, John. Thank you for inviting me also. I'm not going to respond, I'm going to add on. So yeah, it's an outrageous announcement that the Israeli government will consider annexation starting on July 1st. But there are a few things we need to look at when we look at this announcement. First of all and foremost, it has not happened yet. The decision has not been made yet. There is actually no political incentive on the Israeli side to make it happen. It used to be the incentive from the settler movement to push Netanyahu into power, but Netanyahu now has a coalition and has a stable coalition with more moderate crazy Zionists, so he doesn't need that. The political push is actually coming from the US administration. And the reason why now, I saw one of the questions we received was why now is very, very important. There is a very small window of opportunity, as they call it, for this idea, which is starting July 1st until the US elections. This was the initiative of the US administration, and this was done in a way to appeal to the Trump base of Christian evangelicals. And it is something that is being also reviewed now by the US administration itself, whether or not they want to push for that. So this is actually a very opportune time for us to push back because it has not been done yet. And once it is done, it is going to be horrific to the people on the ground. I can talk more about that in the Q&A if people want to, about how this would affect people on the ground with mass expropriations and dispossession and deportations, but also the political implications and the legal implications that Jonathan has so well described. These are demonstrations in Israel, Palestine over the last few days, Saturday mainly against annexation, but also to protest against police brutality. We want to see such demonstrations all around the world. Unfortunately, this is really not a very good time for that. You know, as you know, what's happening now in the US, we have the pandemic, we have the unflattened curve of COVID-19, we have the rising resistance to authoritarianism and fascism with demonstrations of our own, and also the pushback against state violence, policing and surveillance and the public lynchings of the police. So it looks very much the same, but to get people here to care enough about annexation in Palestine seems like a hard thing to achieve. So I'm going to suggest 3 lines of action that we can take. And when I say we, I mean here the movement in the US of people who care about world peace, who care about people's rights, who specifically care about Palestinian liberation. Because annexation is a step that we cannot go back from. It is a really serious move, and it is so outrageous. It's as Jonathan explained, it's a step into a new era of world wars, in a way. But we also don't know exactly what annexation will look like, because it's not as if we have a map of annexation. And it's most probably going to look much, much, much less than what people are thinking of. Knowing Netanyahu, he will push some hybrid map that nobody understands of some little areas, but creating already the facts on the ground, as they always do. So how do we get people to care here? How do we get that to happen? So the first thing is, as I said, this is a US plan. This is a US declaration that they recognize the annexation of the Golan Heights. It's already been done. So one obvious move is to appeal to Congress, to appeal to your representatives, to talk to Democrats. If there is a very, very clear statement coming from Democrats that if they get to win the elections in November, then annexation will not be recognized, or that there will be real sanctions on Israel, this can affect decision-making right now. This is exactly what the Israeli government is looking for. This is what we need them to announce now, as soon as possible. So if they are against annexation, great. Biden said he was against annexation. What does it mean? We want them to take a very strong stance. So it doesn't matter on any level, contact your representatives, ask them to take a clear statement. This is an example of just one petition we have on the AFSC website. I can put the link in the chat later. The second thing is, look at what's happening around us. I mean, the Platform for Black Lives has issued a call already a couple of years ago for divest, invest, divesting from state violence, state oppression, and reinvested and investing in our communities and our well-being. Now let's take that to the United Methodist Church. It's not enough to just divest from private prisons and then divest from 3 companies and then divest from these banks. We want to say something that is much bigger than that. We want to say that we do not want to be invested in any way, even in our money, with state oppression and state violence. And that would include, of course, military aid to Israel. It would include the profiteering from mass surveillance, many of them Israeli companies. It would include the Israeli occupation. It will be much bigger than just one company at a time or one issue at a time. And they invest in good. This is BDS. I mean, this is a boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement reinterpreted for our times. It's no longer just about one issue. It is intersectional divestment. And many of the times, these are the same companies that are responsible for repression in Palestine. And here, many of them are US companies, even if the ideologies and technologies were tested on Palestinians first. One tool that I want to encourage you to use, and I will put the link in the chat later, is our publication. It's called Investigate. And it allows you to actually also scan your own investment. Go into your own pension fund, go into your own mutual fund, check to see if they're invested in prisons or in militarized borders or in the persecution of immigrants in this country. All of the above, as well as Palestine. And look for alternatives, because it rates different mutual funds and gives you different options so you can switch. You can also upload the list of holdings of the United Methodist Church and see what they are invested in still on these issues. So I will put the link in the chat in a moment. One last comment about this second form of action is about the fact that this is deeply related to annexation. For years now, we see a campaign of disinformation against BDS, against divestment, against boycott, divestment, and sanctions, which comes from the Israeli annexation movement. Because their whole point was that you should not differentiate settlements, that you should not treat settlements as if they are not part of Israel. The moment you do that, then you are in a way boycotting them, or you are BDSing them, and that's anti-Semitic and that's wrong. And so we see dozens of states that have anti-BDS legislation, a discussion in the federal government about also such legislation, and all of that about the fact that we should treat settlements as if they are part of Israel. In other words, that we should legally annex settlements. And this is just a picture from New Orleans, where the city has tried to pass last year a resolution that says we do not want to be invested in any human rights violations anywhere. And this was rescinded after 1 week because of pressure from the Jewish institutional groups in New Orleans, claiming that that was BDS. In other words, that once you support human rights, you support Palestinian rights, and that's unacceptable. So I want to say that intersectional divestment, or looking at human rights as a whole for our investment policy, is very much BDS, as seen by our opposition. And the last idea for action, and a very, very easy action to take, is to actually implement resolutions already taken by the United Methodist Church. you don't need to do any legislative work anymore. There is already a resolution calling for the boycott of settlement products. Now more than ever, especially for the settlement industries that are going to be annexed or probably want to be annexed as part of the first wave of annexation, it is crucial for us to send the message to settlement companies that their impunity is not going to last, that this is not going away, that even if Israel annexes the territory, it is illegal by international law, and therefore they are still complicit in the violation of the international law. In fact, they are even more complicit because now they're also complicit in this illegal annexation. And one such company that was highlighted by the United Nations in their recent publication of settlement companies is General Mills. General Mills makes so many household products that we all use all the time. We are actually not calling for the boycott of all General Mills products because we think that's too much to ask, but only for the Pillsbury brand. Pillsbury actually has a factory in a settlement near Jerusalem in the Atarot industrial zone. It's an illegal settlement. Probably one of the first list of those to be annexed. And they make frozen baked goods there. It's a very easy campaign. It's a really fun campaign. Look at the Pillsbury boy. Look how cheerful the Pillsbury boy. And remember, the Pillsbury doughboy is a war criminal. So I offer it to you as an idea for a campaign to run on the local level or the national level to boycott Pillsbury. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, DALIT. There are many questions that have been raised, and I'm not going to get to all of them. I apologize for that. Please do continue to send these questions, and you can send them through the various links we have to our organizations. Please do send them, and we will try to respond. I do have a question about the two-state solution. Does this really put the nail in the coffin of the two-state solution? And I'm going to, I think there's been some addressing of that already, but I'll start with Jonathan and then DALIT.
Okay. For many people, you have to understand that the two-state solution has always been a compromise. It has not been a goal. It has not been the ideal. It has been Palestinians giving up basically 78% of their land in return for getting a probably demilitarized state in the areas that were captured in '67, including sharing East Jerusalem, including some qualified right of return. The people who have undermined that solution have not been the Palestinians. It has been the Israeli Zionist maximalists who wanted to keep everything, but who did not want to outright annex it because they didn't want to dilute the demographic character of the Jewish state. So it's hard for us to really come through and say, look, we accepted the two-state solution, but you guys did not accept it. So now we have to go back to asking the hard questions of what does it mean to have a Jewish state? What does Zionism stand for anyway? How does Palestinian nationalism fit in at all? Can we have a new thinking that is based on equality, that is based on human rights, and stop this charade, because it has been a charade. This whole talk about the two-state solution, from Israel's point of view anyway, has been a charade, a pretense, a way for us to have our cake and eat it too, to claim to be democratic, to claim to be liberal, to claim to be part of the Western world, without at the same time giving equality to everybody in our state, under our control. The truth is, there has only been one state from '67 until today. There's only been one state between the river and the sea. And while people like myself have naively tried to work within those perimeters and work for a two-state solution, the Israeli government has not really ever been serious about allowing Palestinians a state. And so we must now enter into the process of rethinking the whole thing. And rethinking the whole thing does not mean that you want to negate the others. For many people, to talk about one state is to talk about eliminating the state of Israel. Well, at some level, you are eliminating a racist, exclusivist Jewish state in favor of a state which recognizes and accepts and allows equality among its citizens, which Israel is refusing to allow even within the 67 borders.
Okay. Thanks, Jonathan. DALIT, do you want to deal with that or another question?
I just want to add something. Of course, it's already a one state. Israel controls the entire area. But I have a problem with my colleagues and friends in the movement that say, oh, annexation, shmannexation, it doesn't really matter. Israel has already done that. And I want us to take it really as an important moment, because it has huge implications for people living on the land. First of all, Israel has a law that was also extended to Palestinians in East Jerusalem after the annexation of East Jerusalem, that will allow it to immediately, automatically expropriate the land of Palestinians living outside of the annexed area. In other words, Palestinians living on the West Bank that have land, agricultural land, that is now the land that settlements are built on. Settlements are very much built on private Palestinian property. That property will immediately be expropriated from them by Israeli law. The same is true with Palestinians whose communities are not recognized by the Israeli authorities now, because these are areas where Israel really wanted to get rid of them already. Once this becomes officially part of the state of Israel, they will be illegal in their own homes, because they will not be seen as actual residents of the area. So Israel can immediately deport them as illegals or something, infiltrators, and so on and so forth. And as for the annexation itself, Israel also has a law that any area which is part of Israeli sovereign area, in other words, annexed or taken over in 1948, cannot be given up without a special majority in the Knesset. So it also precludes any kind of territorial agreements in the future. It will make it practically impossible for the Israeli parliament to make any decision about giving land to Palestine.
Here's a question. This has been asked, will Trump's growing weakness, President Trump's growing weakness, influence this debate at all? I don't think this is a long answer, but I'd like for you both to address that. Maybe starting with you, Jonathan.
Well, it's interesting that Trump has sort of allowed very right-wing elements to basically control his policy in terms of the Middle East. And this group does not reflect the views of American Jews, the majority of American Jews. But it is very much in sync with the views of some of the more right-wing evangelicals in this country. So in a way, even the recognition, the movement of the embassy to Jerusalem was not really required or requested by Netanyahu or Israel. It was really pushed for by evangelicals in this country. So in a way, the church is really directly implicated also in the annexation debate. President Trump doesn't really care one way or another. But if he thinks he can get some political benefit out of annexation, out of appearing to be favoring the most extreme elements among Israelis, he will do it because he thinks it's beneficial. If he hears, however, especially from evangelicals, that this is not really the best thing, that you're not doing us any favors, you're not gaining any more votes by doing it, then of course he would not do it.
All right, Dalit.
I'm good with what Jonathan said. This is perfect.
Okay, I'd like to ask you another question then. There was a headline in Haaretz that right-wing lawmakers always knew that the West Bank land grab law would be struck down.
Oh.
Could you address that question?
Yeah, so this is really complicated, but I'll just say a couple of words about that. There is a law that actually passed in the Knesset and was brought to the Supreme Court in Israel about normalizing or legalizing settlements that were built on private Palestinian property, which are actually also illegal by Israeli law. And that law was struck down yesterday, which is huge, beautiful, great news. But most commentators think that it was struck down by the Supreme Court, not because the Supreme Court suddenly opposes settlements. The Supreme Court has legalized settlements whenever they were brought in front of it, the Israeli Supreme Court. One idea is that this is done because annexation will already solve that problem. And one idea was that this was done because there's great fear in Israel because of the deliberation of the International Court of International Criminal Court, the International Criminal Court, opening an investigation on Israeli crimes against the Palestinian people. And while this is being debated or thought of whether or not the International Criminal Court is going to open the investigation, the idea was the Supreme Court wants to show that it is really dealing with the issues, because one thing that the International Criminal Court needs to decide is whether or not a local jurisdiction is enough. Maybe whether or not the local jurisdiction is looking at the occupation and the crimes of the occupation. So they thought, oh, annexation will solve this, and we need to look good to the International Criminal Court. So they made a good decision. They made a really good decision yesterday. But it is really just noise right now. It's just confusing people. That's not what's happening.
Here's a question that really deviates from this immediate question, but it's one that is frequently asked, and this is asked by one of our strong supporters. And Dalit, you probably have to deal with this question a lot, is opposition to Israel being considered anti-Semitic in many quarters, even by progressives. Would you care to share just a few thoughts about that?
Yeah, I actually don't have to deal with that, being a Jewish Israeli myself. I think most of you have to deal with it a lot more than I do. So you are the experts, not I am. I can only say for myself that accusations of or labeling as anti-Semites should not stop people from speaking out for justice. And it's unpleasant to be called names, but it's probably not as unpleasant as living under occupation and being targeted by a state regime. And if you do have doubts, you really need to consult your own hearts of whether or not your fight for Palestine does it come from hatred or does it come from love? That's what you need to ask yourselves.
Jonathan?
Well, in Matthew, Jesus says that there's a very special blessing that comes to you if they speak all manner of evil things against you falsely for my name. So there's a special blessing in being called anti-Semitic, but only if that accusation is false. If you really are anti-Semitic and you really hate Jews, there's no blessing for you. In fact, you need to repent, because that is a sin. This is at least my theological answer to that. Yes, there have been people who have weaponized the accusation of anti-Semitism to stifle dissent, to stifle any kind of criticism of Israel's policies. And looking at it as from the Christian point of view, the question is, do you deserve that special blessing that comes if you are falsely accused, or don't you?
Okay. We're in our last quarter hour. I think it's best to readdress some of the questions about what do we do and how can we accomplish this. I think DALIT, explained pretty well what she feels that we must do as members of a church that has a specific investment policy. Jonathan, would you have anything to add to her recommendations?
Yes, I think a very large part of the task is to maintain hope and to maintain integrity in our position from an ethical and a moral point of view. Unlike South Africa, here we have a situation where there are very powerful forces inside the country that will prevent the kind of solidarity with the oppressed people that we witnessed in South Africa. Here, if you dare to speak in favor of Palestinian rights, you will find many very powerful people who will attack you, who will make you pay a price. It's not an easy task to support Palestinians today. You can support just about any kind of idea, any kind of cause, and get away with it. But you support Palestinians and you will be attacked. So you have to know where you stand and why you take that position. Fortunately, you can do that because the facts are clear. International law is clear. The moral and ethical basis for supporting Palestinian rights is clear. It's universal. It is a principled position. How do you do that and at the same time withstand the attacks against you? That is the risk. That is the cross that you have to bear. It is not easy, but many people are doing it, and they do it through intersectionality. You bring allies. You make clear that your support for Palestinian rights is not just opposition to Israel, but it's opposition to violations of human rights everywhere. That it's being principled, that you believe in equality, that you yourself stand against racism, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia wherever they rear their ugly head. This is what I would say on that issue.
Okay, thank you. DALIT, a question has been raised about intersectionality. You dealt with that also, but more specifically, the recent protests and similarities, Israeli tactics compared to tactics by US police and so forth. Would you say more about that and how that could help us to move along?
Yeah, and also that really connects again to your previous question about the charge of anti-Semitism. I feel that there is a way in which we want to connect Palestinian rights to issues that are considered domestic here in the US, which is, how do I say, clanky. It doesn't really work very well, and it doesn't really convince people very well. And we've been doing that in all sorts of ways over the years, which is to find one company that works, let's say Elbit Systems. It has also towers on the US-Mexico border, and it's also Israel's largest military company. So maybe we can get people to care like that. But it's a coincidence, or the fact that there are similarities in police tactics, or in the case of Israel, military tactics of subduing protesters there and here. It's all true, but it's not enough. We have to go beyond that. And one way of doing that I've seen done is not convincing to me, because it portrays Israel as leading the US into this world of colonialism and racism. And we know the US was there long before Israel was established. So that I would associate with some explicit need to target Jews, some form of that. The truth of the matter is that the US is much larger than Israel. It is much more powerful than Israel. And it is also a problematic place. It's a wonderful place, and it's also a problematic place, as we see today in the news. So making those similarities and analogies should be done very carefully. And one way of doing it sincerely is by seeing the deeper similarities, by seeing how the same ideologies of control and repression and racism govern both regimes in their worst moments. And specifically now, the political opportunism of like using that window of opportunity. What is this window of opportunity? To deepen the control over the Palestinians. And also the cynical ways in which the accusations of anti-Semitism and these anti-BDS legislation and the repression of Palestinian activists, how these are used to suppress the building of a new resistance movement in this country on all issues. These things are deeply connected. So what I'm trying to say, we really do care about racism in this country. We really do care about police brutality and about the hunting down of immigrants and the militarization of the border of the police and the mass incarceration. And we really do care about that. And because we really do care about that, we see how these technologies are being developed and tested on Palestinians in the occupation. We see how it is the same thing. So
have a few minutes.
That's what I want to say about intersectionality. It shouldn't be just a tool,
Right.
but a deep conviction.
I think one of your key words was clanky. Is that true? We want to address, what we can do now. We agreed to that beforehand. I think you've been looking at some of the chat section yourselves. I'm just going to leave it up to you to address any further issues you think this group should deal with, and especially in terms of what they might be able to do individually or collectively. Jonathan, would you start with that and then leave some time for DALIT to answer as well?
Well, I think that we need to recognize that the power of the pro-Palestinian or the Palestinian solidarity community is that of a moral nature and an ethical nature. We really don't have the economic clout to really make Israel suffer and pay a big price for what it does. We do have the moral clout, however, to deny them the pretense that they are the only democracy in the Middle East, that they are in tune with Western liberal values, which they're not. We do have the power to deny them the claim that they are somehow keepers and guardians of what's called Judeo-Christian ethics against barbarism and against illiberality. We do have the power to say that they do not stand for the values and the principles that we cherish and hold true to. This we can do, and this we need to do, and this we need to do in every forum where it is possible. And to do that, however, we must be very clear about what those values are, and the fact that we actually believe in those values and are not just using them as tools. So when we say that racism is bad, we have to say racism is bad. And anti-Semitism is wrong. Anti-Semitism is wrong. Islamophobia is wrong. When we say we believe in human rights, we have to say we believe in human rights everywhere in the world, in this country and in Israel, Palestine, and elsewhere in the Arab world. Which is why we cannot just take it as a political thing. It's not a question of whether you are pro-Israeli or pro-Palestinian. It's that you really are pro-justice and pro-human dignity and human rights. And this is something that you believe in, whether it helps or your particular political inclination or it doesn't. These are our core values. And I recognize that we are talking here about a church group that's trying to decide its church policy. As a denomination, what do we stand for? Where do we stand on these issues? So it's important that we have to speak in an ethical and a clear voice on these issues.
I'll give you 3 minutes.
John, can you just remind me of the question? I'm sorry. I was responding.
This is whatever you want to address about what we can do now.
Oh, yeah, so I already did. So I think that it's important to remember that this is US policy we're talking about. So we all feel a little bit kind of at a loss as to what to do with the current administration. I feel at a loss of what to do with the current regime in Israel, but they are also very, very sensitive because the US is before an election, because there is this huge uprising in the streets, and the Israeli administration is also at a very kind of iffy position with all the pending legal action against Netanyahu. So that means that a pushback can be effective. We cannot just give up right now. So I just want to say anything you do, especially on the political policy level, would be very, very important. If there is a statement from the United Methodist Church that actually calls on politicians to take action, I think that can make a difference. I think any kind of public statement at this moment, July until November, can be very, very influential. And of course, I really want to promote the General Mills campaign. I think they would make a really fun target for all of us to rebuild our movement.
Say that again. I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear it.
To promote the boycott of
General Mills. Yeah, I know you have a particular affection for the Pillsbury Doughboy.
I've been involved in many dozens of campaigns over the years, and it's been a while since we had a fun boycott campaign to support, and I think we all need a fun boycott campaign.
Okay, well, let's hear it for fun. I think that we'll need to start to wrap up here. I'm going to remind people that we have another webinar coming up, and it's been put in the chat, but it will be Wednesday, July 8th at 1 p.m. about authentic Holy Land pilgrimages. Janet Lar Lewis, a retired United Methodist missionary, will be part of that, and you'll find that the same ways that you found out about this last seminar. We have I would encourage you to go on the chat, and maybe, Bridget, we can leave the this open, I mean, for people to read it through and not end the meeting just precisely at the hour, so that people can have a chance to read through all this important information. People have raised issues about the one-state solution, why we don't endorse a single democratic state. I think Jonathan tried to address that as well, and I'm hoping that can remain an active discussion, however. I am going to just say how much I appreciate your participation in this. Most of you are involved in some way or another in this movement, but some I've noticed just some names I don't know quite well and have not been actively involved in the past. So I thank you all for being a part of this. Please do contact us at www.kairosresponse.org. That's very important to us that you respond to us. And if you are of another denomination, we will be glad to redirect you. Many denominations are working in concert on this. So please don't hesitate, and we'll try to get you to the right organization. I'm going to give it over to Bridget here real quick as our sign off, and thank you all very much. Bridget, anything to say?
No, nothing else. If there's anything in the chat that you want to keep, just copy and paste it. And I think there's a way to do that by clicking on the 3 dots once you're in the chat on the right, and you can click Save Chat, and it'll save to your computer.
Okay.
Let's hope you keep a recording of this.
We have recorded this, so that'll come out both
Okay,
from
that's
UMKR
good.
and from MFSA.
I want to thank Jonathan and DALIT especially. This requires a lot of energy and planning and years and years of educating themselves, and they're both quite learned. If you have questions for them, we'll try to get those questions to you, DALIT and Jonathan, or both of you, so that you can answer more directly and precisely.
Thank you very much.
I think we're all, I'm going to sign us off here. And
Thank you, DALIT. You were great.
Well, I think you were both great. Thank you all very much for being a part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.